Continuing Louisiana versus all y'all's trip around the state of Louisiana, kind of setting the landscape for this fast approaching high school football season. We're dipping down to the Bayou parishes with Chris Singleton, longtime Bayou parishes sports reporter. He was still over at the Houma Courier full time when I met him, and now he's over there kind of paying it forward to the next generation over at Nicholls State and getting some of that next generation of young sports reporters and reporters in general ready to roll. And Chris, appreciate you, right before you guys start off the new semester, taking some time to talk about some of these, fantastic high school football teams around the area.
Yeah, I mean, even though it's been summer, like I tell my students, journalism never dies, sports journalism never dies. It's round the clock, 24 hours a day. Every month of the year, you're doing something sports related or writing something or making a video or something. So it's never really in. Even though we were just coming from the summer, so we're getting ready to kick up here, and I've been in communication with a lot of coaches and players around here, getting ready for the season. So I know they're fired up, and this Bayou is the life of the whole year, football season, the tailgates, the parties, the parades, the bands, the cheerleaders, everybody in the communities down here get excited for it. So I know they're ready for it, and we're just a couple of weeks away before it's for real, I guess.
No doubt. Let's jump into it and start with, some of the big boys up in 5A. That 8-5A district has a mix of some of your teams down there in the Bayou, as well as some of the River Parish teams up there with, the recent state champion in Destrehan. But that 8-5A district is Central Lafourche, Destrehan, East St. John, H.L. Bourgeois, Hanville, Terrebonne, and Thibodaux. And so I think, for you, Central Lafourche, HL, Terrebonne, and Thibodaux are kind of the primary teams that you're pretty consistently on top of. I think at times they've kind of opened some eyes in recent years. HL with some of the talent they've had coming through, including Tyron Winslow, who's now committed to SMU, Terrebonne, and some of the talent they have coming through under Coach TY and on down the list. Take me through kind of what you're seeing from some of those Bayou teams in that 8-5A district as the season approaches.
Well, just like every year, I always say that, this 8-5A district is sort of like the old SEC West of LHSA football. I mean, it's really loaded. I know there's a lot of great programs in 5A across the state, but like you just mentioned, Destrehan, Hanville, East St. John, Terrebonne, those programs have consistently made the playoffs. Destrehan has won championships. They've contended for state titles. They've won district championships, put out some really great recruits, LSU's, Alabama's, all over the place. I expect similar this year. It's not going to fall apart. From top to bottom, it's still going to be a very competitive district, a very tough district that you're going to see a lot of these teams going to make deep playoff runs. In my opinion, it still starts with Destrehan. You got to give them their credit. I've been around here for like 27 years, and I can't remember, when Destrehan has had a really bad season or a rebuilding year. They just reload and just keep going, But you're going to see the same thing again with Destrehan. They have so many great athletes and so many great weapons. But for the Bayou schools that have to go against the Hornbills and the Destrehans and East St. John's, they've consistently played with them. Thibodaux, Terrebonne. They a couple of years ago, Terrebonne gave Destrehan a couple of good matchups, and Thibodaux has done the same. Now, as far as Thibodaux and Terrebonne can win a district championship, it may be a challenge, because Destrehan is really so good. And then Hanville, I know they got some new blood coming through there with a new coaching staff. I think East St. John, Coach Brandon Brown always has great athletes, and like they're always on the right there on the edge to taking that next step, and continuing, making it to the Superdome. And but Coach Brown has done a great job with so many great athletes at East St. John. But for the Bayou, I think we're still going to have some really good teams. You mentioned Terrebonne. Terrebonne has been up there. You look at the number of athletes that they put out in the college ranks the last 5 years. Mason Smith, Ja'Kai Douglas, Jalen Lucas before he moved to New Orleans from the Hurricane. And then you see recently with Kylan Billiat, the receiver now at LSU. Talon Bingham, he's coming here to Nichols, and he's a really good defensive lineman. They put out some good talent at Terrebonne the last 5-10 years, and they got another good little crop coming up. They got some really big recruits that are in that system, and the coaching staff is doing a good job of helping them get exposure. So Terrebonne, last year Terrebonne played Destrehan pretty well on the road. I think it was a close game into the fourth quarter. Now, they may have lost a tough game at the end to Thibodeau that kind of hurt them from getting a home playoff game. But Terrebonne has shown they can compete with Destrahans and Harnvilles and East St. John's in the district. Thibodeau under Dre Trosclair, who's a really good coach. He's been around the state, Ascension Catholic, and I think Lehigh and Baton Rouge and Plaquemine. He's won, a lot of games, and he's won some playoff games. He's worked with some really good football players at each one of those stops. So Coach Dre Trosclair is getting into his second year at Thibodeau. And, one thing about Dre is, I've noticed that each one of his stops that first year is kind of him getting established, him, seeing the talent that they have and starting to implement his way of doing things, his style of things. And now into his second year, a full year at Thibodeau, I think Thibodeau can definitely make some, steps towards becoming the traditional Thibodeau team that we've seen with Kyra Lacey's and the Meek Robertsons and and so on. So they don't have a lot of big name stars that are getting recruits right now, but I think after working here in Lafourche Parish the last couple of years, I've seen some of the middle school talent that they've got coming in, and next couple of years, Thibodeau is going to be, if they can keep those guys together and keep them healthy, they can definitely make a run at something. H.L. Bourgeois, you mentioned Winslow. I mean, they got some beef on the lines. Him and Kentra Lacey, yeah, offensive lineman. They got some beef on the line. The question is if they can get the skill position together, get established. That quarterback, I know they had to replace their quarterback this year. They have H.L. Bourgeois has always had talent. They crossed that hall. That's one of the biggest schools here in the Bayou area. And the question is, if they can get them out there, consistently ready to play every week, keep them healthy. And last year was a disappointment for them. They only won 2 games, I think. They kind of expected to take that next step, with all that talent they have there. So now this year it's a whole new season, and I think you mentioned Tyron. I mean, he's really really underrated, across the state. I know he's going to SMU, but I don't think a lot of people really know how good he is, and hopefully this year they can see that. Same thing with Lacey. He's a really big guy. And Central Lafourche, that program has just struggled with some consistency lately, especially with the coaching position. I know they had a couple coaches come and go, but now Shelly Bedros has stepped in as the coach. He's going into his second year. So hopefully now that they have some kind of coaching consistency there, the players can buy into what the coaches want to do. And last year they won 1 game, I think, which was great for those players. Last couple of years, I think the year before that, or maybe the last 2 years, they went 0-10 and had a long losing streak. So just getting that win kind of gave them some kind of momentum to build towards the future. And that's just the key. They may not win 3, 4, 5 games, but they could just take those small steps towards building things. That's going to be big for Coach Bedros and the Central Lafourche this year.
Yeah, keeping an eye on all 4 of those teams, kind of piecing together, as you mentioned, kind of different degrees of progress, and all trying to, like everyone in that district, catch up to Destrehan with the way things have been going for Destrehan the last couple of years. In 8-4A, which is another really fun district to watch, a lot of Bayou Parish teams on down the list. There's AJ Ellender, Assumption, Edie White, Lutcher, Morgan City, South Lafourche, South Terrebonne, and Vanderbilt Catholic, all in that league now with Edie White coming back up to 4A. And so that one, I think you look and you see Assumption with the way they've come on in recent years, and Edie White and the success they've had, the tradition of Vanderbilt Catholic, and obviously, I mean, Lutcher has been just historically one of the top public school programs in the state in terms of winning state championships. How much are you looking forward to some of those Friday nights with that 8-4A group, and what do you have your eyes on in terms of some of the potential there?
That district's going to be awesome. You mentioned they have some teams that have competed for state championships recently. Letcher, obviously, Edie White. They 2 years ago they had U High, Cajun Phil. Right there have a chance to win that game, and they just missed out. But those are some really consistent programs. Vanderbilt's really consistent. They're usually pretty good. They can count on them to get to the playoffs every year, maybe win a playoff game or two. But I think, looking at that district again this year is going to be pretty exciting. Letcher, obviously, I would say right now it's the favorite, even though Assumption is the defending district champion. I know Assumption, they've done a really good job building that program up under Coach Will Broussard. Last year they came out of nowhere and, beat beat Letcher on the road at Letcher, and then dominated district play. Reese Turner, who was all rural quarterback / receiver. He did everything for Assumption, but he was pretty much unstoppable and helped them get to at least the third round. They had a chance to maybe go to the semis last year. I think a double overtime loss to Northwest at home. That could have went either way. They had a couple questionable calls in that playoff game, but Assumption has always been a traditional power. It's the only school in that district, and the only school in that parish. And you look at all the great talent that's come through there. Brandon Jacobs, Shamon Williams, a lot of really good players. That program has DNA running through the players, the current players' blood, you can say. They did lose a lot though. They lost Reese Turner, and they lost Chase Jacobs, their big running back from last year. But I think they got some new kids coming in that can maybe help them win contend in that district. But Letcher, I would say going in, Letcher probably is the favorite right now because they have a lot of returning players, and Coach Jenkins does a really good job every year in, year out, building that, keeping that consistency going. But Assumption, you can't count them out. They really got some really good guys, and I'm looking at some of the notes I jotted down. Some returning players, Landon Sanchez, at quarterback. They got a really good offensive lineman in Jace Williams. Assumption usually always has a really good offensive line. So if they can, keep get some new players, some experience, I think they can do pretty well. Kobe Bima, is a receiver. He's pretty good too. He caught a lot of really good passes for him. You can't count the Mustangs out, and Coach Broussard has some life in that program. And if you go on campus, they have a lot of projects going on. I think they're getting turf field this year for the first time. They're rebuilding their gym, so there's a lot of excitement in Napoleonville right now. So they're going to be in the mix. Edie White every year, I can't remember a year where Edie White just hasn't been good. Edie White. Now they did lose a lot from that team, the last couple of years that just been dominating the whole area due to graduation. But one thing about Coach Kyle Assign and his staff is they are good at what they do. They don't change up a lot. They is very consistent with their game plan. They're going to run the ball. They're going to have a big offensive line. They're going to have a big defensive line, and their defense. People look at the Edie White defense and they be like, those players are good, But when they get on the field on Friday nights, they shocking everybody with how fast they are, how physical they are. I think you're going to see the same thing from Edie White again, And they know all of the teams in that district. They compete against Vanderbilt and Assumptions every year. Letcher, I remember a couple of years ago when they had big lunch, Winfield kid, Edie White smacked them in the mouth. So, and that's a big rivalry that goes back decades with Edie White and Letcher, and so Edie White's going to be there. Kyle Assign is a great coach. Him and his coaching staff. One thing I say about Edie White is you're not going to catch them unprepared because they are going to scheme. They're going to game plan. They're going to have their kids ready to play every Friday night. So if you plan to go to Edie White and beat them, you're going to have to limit the mistakes, and you're going to have to really play a near perfect game because they're not going to just hand the game to you. It's always a fight against Edie White. Vanderbilt is Vanderbilt. I know they have a new coach. After losing Coach Minton, Brian Wallace, who is a former Nichols assistant, is now the head coach at Vanderbilt. Luckily for him, he has a really experienced group. A lot of those kids that are at Vanderbilt, they've been playing for like the last 4 and 5 years, and so the key now is, just, getting some young people to fill in some gaps that they lost from last year. They lost a lot of really good players to graduation, but they got one of the best players in our area and maybe the state in Jalen Coleman. And I've been watching Jalen since he was in elementary school.
Yeah.
Every year he's getting bigger and better, and now he's committed to Liberty, but he had a lot of big offers on the tables. Oregon's, and he has some SEC offers, Big 10, Big 12. One thing about Jalen is he's fast, but he can make you miss, and he's also pretty physical for his size. I've seen him truck some defenders. I see him use his elusiveness to break away for some really big players. So Jalen is definitely, in my opinion, I don't really think a lot of people across the state really know who he is yet. But down here in the Bayou, they always say that Jalen reminds them of Eli McGuire's and a lot of really good running backs that we've had. Philip Livis, that we've had come from Homer that went on to have great college careers and make it to the NFL. So I think Jalen is in that crop where he's going to be the next step. And this is his senior year, and I think he's averaged last 4 years over 1,500 yards a season. He's done everything. The key for Vanderbilt now is they got this great weapon, and I know they're trying to rebuild their lines. So Vanderbilt is usually really known for good offensive line play, good defensive line play, but now they're going to have some new players stepping in. So hopefully, if they can get those, that physical punch and along the lines ready to go, I think that Vanderbilt can make some noise. You can't count them out because they're Vanderbilt. They're a really good school that competes every year. Some other teams in the district, you mentioned South Lafourche. South Lafourche is another team. I know they lost their quarterback, Carson Ogeron, to graduation, but Coach BJ Young is a really good coach, and he's keeping them together. He has they may not have experience there, but he has some players. One thing about South Lafourche is you know they're down the bayou and they're hardworking kids and they take pride in their community. So they're going to compete hard every night. The fans there are probably one of the biggest fan bases that we have here in the bayou. So they're going to pack the stadiums. They're going to cheer for those guys. So I think South Lafourche is definitely a team that you always got to keep an eye out in that district. And some other teams, South Terrebonne's the same way. Coach Aaron Babin is in his second year at South Terrebonne. They're still trying to get that program up to the level that we've known maybe 15 years ago, where they were competing for districts and making playoff runs. So Coach Aaron Babin is a really good coach, very disciplined and very he's going to have his players ready to play. Now they may not line up athletes like a Terrebonne, where at Terrebonne has a lot of athletes, but they are going to line up and they're going to play you hard. So South Terrebonne, they may not win district, but if they can win a couple games and be in that mix of 3, 4, 5 wins and maybe sneak in the playoffs, that'd be a big win for them. Ellender didn't win the game last year, obviously, but that program is obviously going through a lot right now. They're still dealing with the aftermath of the Hurricane Ida that devastated them. That's you can't say that's an excuse anymore, but you go there at the school, and obviously it is when their school hasn't been rebuilt yet, and but the coaching staff and the players are making the most of it. They're still going out there and they're still competing and they're still fighting. And I know Coach Hazlitt, he's been there at Ellender for like 20 something years, and he's been dedicated to that program as an assistant, now as the head coach. And it'd be nice to see them win a couple games this year, because those kids at Ellender deserve it after all they've been through. And I know they've lost a lot of talent after the hurricane, but they're not giving up. So they may not make the playoffs, but maybe just being there, showing up on Friday nights and competing would be everything for those schools. And I think the last one's Morgan City, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Morgan City is a new coach, Coach Mark Danos. He's coached at HR Bourgeois the last couple of years as an assistant. Morgan City's just like Ellender. They're just trying to get their feet under them right now. I know they won 3 games last year, but the problem for Morgan City is once they get into that very competitive district, it's different from pre-district, obviously. Coach Danos is a very intense coach. He was, I think he was the powerlifting coach at HL last couple of years. So he's bringing life to that program, and they got some really good players. Thomas Mancuso, um, is a really good quarterback, a big arm, a really good baseball player. Now Morgan City Ellender, they're not going to compete for district championships, but they are definitely going to try to set the tone for the future. And that's the goal. They may not win a lot of games this year, but maybe 3-4 years down the line, get those fans something to look forward to, and that's the key for them. But when you look at that district, I think Letcher right now may be the favorite, and that's just I mean that's a credit to what Coach Jenkins has been able to do. Assumption's going to be right there. Vanderbilt and Edie White's also going to be right there. You can't count those teams out. This could be a really fun district, and if you have a chance to come watch those teams in that 8-4-8 district, definitely come down because they're traditional good, and they got some really hardworking schools on that Bayou with some really passionate fans.
Yeah, I agree with you from the outside. It feels like Lutcher is probably the favorite, but some of those games on Friday nights late in the season between those four in particular are going to be an awful lot of fun. And a lot of those teams are really familiar with this small group in 3A with, some of the teams that have jumped up the 4A. There's only four teams in the 7 3A district: Berwick, Donaldsonville, Patterson, and St. James. And as I mentioned, a lot of those 4A teams and 3A teams have either been recent district rivals or just play each other even in non-district. When you look at that 3A group, I mean, what's your familiarity level with some of those teams? I know St. James well, which is going to be a talented team once again, but a really young St. James team. And I mean, how do you see that quartet in 7 3A potentially shaping up as the season approaches?
Well, it starts with St. James, because you look at, even though they're young, they're talented, and they got some really good talent there. The other schools in that district may not have the same talent right now, but they got good programs. That's not saying they're going to be bad, but St. James is just that's one of those programs that just reload. They don't rebuild. Last year they made it to the dome, and they could have won it. They should have won it in some areas, but they just couldn't do it against Union Parish. But they lost some really good players. I think the quarterback play is going to be key for them. Losing Braden Williams, who was all world, all state for them last year. Kobe Brown was a great receiver for them. Having to replace some of those guys with some really new talent coming up. You may think St. James is just going to fall off, but they're going to be up there, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him back, in the quarters, semis, maybe back in the state championship next year if they get it all together. Because Coach Davis is a really good coach, Levanta Davis, and he's had success everywhere he's been. I think from Scotlandville to whether he was in New Orleans area with some of those programs too. They're not going to accept anything but success at St. James. That's just the program. That's just the nature of the business there. So I think they're going to dominate the district. I don't. Donaldsonville. They got some new life. I think they got a new coach. The old coach from East
From East
Ascension, I think.
Ascension, yeah, Coach
Yeah.
Lee, yeah.
That's going to be a game changer because I think Donaldsonville has always had talent, and they've always not recently, but I remember one year, a couple years back, they really gave it to St. James here at Nichols. They played a game here at Nichols, and they just dominated St. James with Coach Valdez there. That's a rivalry too, So I don't know if this year is going to be the year that Donaldsonville dominates St. James, but they're gonna make those games competitive, and Coach Lee doesn't, he's been around for a while. He knows what he's doing. They have athletes at Donaldsonville, and I know they do. Basketball, football, track. So Coach Lee can bring his system and give them some discipline. They can definitely contend for a district title this year. Barrick and Patterson are still, building their programs up. 2 years ago they both were in a quarterfinals, and they lost a lot of really good players. Barrick, another year under Coach Mike Walker, and I'm just looking. They got 7 returning starters on both sides of the ball coming back from Barrick. And last year they only won 3 or 4 games, but they played some really close games, but just couldn't finish. So Coach Walker, he's looking to, finish some games up against, some really good teams. Patterson, St. James, and I'm looking at some of the returning players they have. Stephen Jones is a really good linebacker for him. Carter Whipple, Evan Krappel is going to be the quarterback. So Coach Walker does a really good job. He comes from that Tommy Minton uh, tree. I think he was a Vanderbilt assistant, a couple of years ago. So he knows what he's doing. He has established that program at Barrick. So the key is if he can just keep the players healthy and get some experience, and they can do some things. Same thing with Patterson. I know Patterson. That's another traditional program down here. Right now, they're just trying to get into just to rebuild the program up under Coach Shannon Craig, and they only won 3 games last year. So Patterson, they have athletes too, just like Donaldsonville and St. James. It's just a key of could those players just come together with the coaching staffs, play pretty well, and I don't expect them to make state championship appearances like they did back in the 2000s with Kenny Hilliards and all of those great guys. But I think that they can definitely win a couple games here and set the tone for the future. But that district, in my opinion, starts with St. James, and they got some really good players. They lost Braden Williams and Kobe Brown, but they really one of the receivers I really like, Jakias Villanueva.
Mm-hmm.
He's a receiver. He's really good. I saw him with a kickoff return last year against Sterlington that really helped them get to the dome again. Um, and just also, they got some really young players, but defensive back Jarrell Williams is really good. He's really physical and big. Jai Blaine, another DB, and a linebacker, Chaden Parker. So they have talent. I think the defense and the secondary is going to be their biggest strength, but the offensive line, defensive line may need to rebuild after losing some really good players, and the quarterback position is going to be key for them. Who's going to take that position? This season, I think 2 really young players. So they're going to have to build that up, quarterback and offensive and defensive line. But St. James, I think, should be able to dominate that district.
In 2A, a lot of New Iberia type, to the west direction teams in this 7-2A district, including, probably a couple of the leaders of that group: Catholic New Iberia, Franklin, Lauraville. They've got Delcom, Homa Christian, and West St. Mary in there. I don't know how closely you watch a lot of those teams, other than knowing Homa Christian obviously really well. But what are kind of your thoughts on what about that 7-2A group, and I guess particularly the teams that are closer to your region?
Well, I do watch out for them. Homer Christian obviously is the one that I keep an eye on, but they really got some really. Franklin has been a program that's made the playoffs and won some playoff games. Franklin has a lot of great athletes. You see, not just in basketball where they win the state championship, but a lot of those basketball players are kicking butt in the football field too. Franklin is really good. West St. Mary, I know they're still building their program back up again. For Homer Christian, Homer Christian kind of surprised people last year. I mean, it was with Coach Celestine, Jamar Celestine, who is a former Terrebonne quarterback. He was a longtime Terrebonne High assistant, and he moved on to Homer Christian, I think, last year. One thing that he has brought to Homer Christian is a sense of competitiveness. I mean, they have a lot of great students at Homer Christian, but they really don't have that intensity or that fight, that desire like they have now. They didn't have that previously before Coach Celestine came in. And last year they did a really good job. They made the playoffs. They had some really good players. Joseph Landry, a really good running back. I think he's going on to sit in the area and play football this year. The key is unfortunately for a small 2A school like Homer Christian, you're very short on numbers. So when you lose a really good senior class like that, you have to replace them. But I've seen what they had. They've been working hard all summer. They got some really good young players coming in that program. Now, can they compete with the Franklins and West St. Mary's, Catholic New Iberias? I don't think so right now. But they're not going to just give up. They're still going to go out there and they make, maybe play hard, maybe put up a couple of points. But the goal now for Homer Christian is, to, set that, expectation where we can compete with, public, private, no matter who it is, where we're playing Franklin with 30, 40 something kids, and Homer Christian only has what, 20 maybe. There is some differences in what they can do. But, I think, Homer Christian and what Coach Celestine have done there is they bought the expectation that, yeah, we're trying to build it so where Homer Christian can play up in class, against Franklin's, West St. Mary's, and even around here. I think this year they may play, schools like Ellender, some bigger schools that they traditionally haven't played yet. So, but Coach Celestine has done a good job. And then, Catholic New Iberia, they're pretty one of the most consistent programs. They've been
Yeah.
good for a long time. So, I mean, I think, if you look at that district, they may be the district favorite. Franklin, man, I like what they're doing there. I think Franklin has been one of the, sleepers, I guess you could say, across the state. Not only in football but basketball. They won state last year. People were like, Franklin, really? I didn't even know Franklin had all that. But they got some really good athletes walking that hall there. So they've done a really good job at Franklin. So those are going to be some really good games between Franklin, Catholic, New Iberia, Lauraville, I think. At
Mm-hmm.
one of the schools. I mean, Lauraville has played some really good football. They've had some athletes, move on to, Southland Conference, maybe some from some big schools for recruiting purposes, going on to the next level. But Lauraville is pretty good, so that's gonna be an interesting district. I don't know if Homer Christian is ready to, maybe win a district championship yet. That may be a year or two away, but I'm interested to see how they're going to fare against some of those established public schools like that, and even Catholic New Iberia private school. Really good. It's just a learning process for them right now, and they're building for the future. And I think Coach Celestine is going to have those guys ready in 2, 3, 4 years to, maybe win those districts and make a playoff run in 2A. So.
And then in 1A, you've got a mix right there locally of an established, consistently competitive Central Catholic and a Covenant Christian that I think is kind of coming on and has some nice talent. Some guys back as well as some younger faces that'll be in bigger roles. And in 7-1A, you've got those two: Centerville, Hanson Memorial, and Jeanneret, who is obviously further out there toward New Iberia and is pretty resurgent in its own right after a historic run to the quarters last year. Tell me a little bit about what you see from Central Catholic and Covenant Christian, particularly this year, and just kind of your outlook for 7-1A overall.
I think the landscape of that district has changed because it's usually be dominated by Vermilion Catholic, and I think they're moved up now. So, but Covenant Christian and Central Catholic have been two teams that have just been battling two very consistent programs, especially Central Catholic. They've always been pretty decent. And once again, even though they have some depth issues, they still have some hardworking kids in that program that play both sides of the field. Guys like Ben Case at quarterback, Tate Botno, he's a good athlete. Landon Lapari, defensive end, tight end. So Coach Grogan has a really good staff there, coaching staff. He's a former Patterson guy, so he was there with around those Hilliards and Coach Minton back in the 2000s, and so they are. They're consistent. Central Catholic definitely one of our most consistent 1A programs the last 20 years. You can always expect them to make the playoffs. They've won district, well, they haven't won district in a while because Vermilion Catholic has been the team to beat now. But I think now with Vermilion Catholic on, they can be right up there. You mentioned Covenant Christian. Coach Jesse Turner has done a great job of building that program back up. Coach Turner, former Ellender player, Nichols player, and he had some success at Ellender 2 years ago, getting that program to the playoffs, and which is pretty good. And Coach Turner, one thing about Coach Turner is he's a young guy. He has a lot of energy, just like Coach Grogan at Central Catholic, too. Two really young guys who are just natural football diehards. And Covenant Christian has skilled players all over the field. They have some really good skill position players. They got Jaden Carter, Jahari Carter, the brothers, I guess. Two really good players. One of them's committed to Arkansas Monticello just last week. Connor Lally, a really good physical running back. Carson Abear. One thing I like about Covenant Christian, they got really two really good linebackers. Owen Traskler, Peyton Traskler. Um, those Traskler boys, they can play, and they can really get physical, and they never get off the field because it's 1A ball. You play defense, and you got to go right back out there and contribute on offense. So, but I really do like Covenant Christian because they got some skill position players. They got some weapons. Bailey Strings is a really good receiver. You mentioned the Carter boys. So the key for Covenant Christian is, they have all of these great skill positions, but what are going to do on the line? So if they can get the line position together, they may have some inexperience on the offensive line. They may not have the size there, but they do have weapons, and they're going to spread the ball all over the field. So I think Covenant Christian, is definitely going to be a team to watch out for. They're going to win some games this year under Coach Turner, and he's established a really good program there at Covenant Christian to watch out for. Not only this year, but as the years go on. Some of the other teams in that district, Hanson has made the playoffs the last some of these years. They got some really good some kids there at Hanson. Centerville has really come along too. Coach Charles Jefferson has really raised the bar there. He's a former Assumption player, and they made the playoffs last year. I think they won a playoff game before losing, I think, to Maynham in the playoffs last year. But Centerville is definitely a growing program. They have some players. They may not have all of the numbers that you would expect from, because traditionally a small 1A school, but, they can compete. And that's the one thing that Coach Jefferson always wants to do. He wants to build a program, that can compete every night. And if he can, manage the low numbers, with the roster, I think that, they can definitely make some noise in the district also. Um, and I'm trying to think the other teams in that district.
And then the only one you hadn't talked about is Jeanneret, who obviously they're
Yeah,
pretty
and
far out there to the west.
yeah, Jeanneret, like you mentioned, they had a really good year last year, and Jeanneret is kind of similar to Franklin in a lot of ways. They got a lot of really good athletes there, and it's just a matter of if they can bring it all together, and that's going to be a really hard team to beat because they got athletes there. I don't unfortunately I don't get a chance to watch them that much, but I know that one thing you can expect is they have athletes, and if you have athletes in 1A, you can compete. Because it's really hard to defend. But a lot of people are going to say, yeah, Central Catholic Covenant Christian might be the favorite. You can also throw maybe Jeanneret in there. It's going to be a fun district for 1A. They play really good 1A ball down here, in Homer, Thibodeau, Morgan City areas. So, I think it's going to be a fun district. Central Catholic, you can't count them out. Covenant Christian, I'm really looking forward to see what Coach Turner does there. I think this year is going to be a really good year for them if they can stay healthy and really take advantage. Those two Carter boys are really good, and if you don't know them yet, you're you're going to hear about them this season. That's for sure. So, I think it's going to be a fun year in that 1A district.
Yeah, I do like that district, and you nailed it with the Centerville call of them winning the playoff game and then losing to Mangum in the second round. I double checked that because I couldn't remember offhand, but I mean, to your point, when you've got some athletes and you listed a bunch of them for Covenant Christian, I was hoping you would with the Carter boys and Connor Lally and Carson Abear and on down the list. I think Jaden, after his transfer from Ellender, is going to be a guy that now that he's settled over there at Covenant Christian, a lot of people are going to learn a lot about really quickly in that 2026 class. And Centerville has the guy Tayshawn Jones, who was an all-state guy last year. Jeanneret, as you mentioned, a lot of talent back. They graduated a good group, but a lot of talent still back. And so should be some fun Friday nights for those small schools as well.
Oh yeah, you mentioned Tayshawn Jones. I mean, he's a football player. He was really good, and he could have easily, made I think all-state first team last year, and they had another one, Jamari Iro, who's graduated.
Yep.
But he was a really good player for Centerville. So, Coach Jefferson is a really good guy. He's built that program up. He's an old Assumption, player. He knows football. And I'm looking forward to see what they do this year. They're not going to back away. They're going to still be in that mix also.
Well, Christopher, I appreciate your time, my man.
One thing I forgot to mention earlier, we were talking
Yeah.
about we were talking about Terrebonne. I had to show Terrebonne a little bit more love because they really got some really good players still there. Orion Mosley. If you don't know him yet, you're gonna know him. Offensive line. He's one of the top offensive linemen in the state. He has some really big major offers. Uh, you know, and I think he's going to be the key. And they got some, even though they lost their big running back, Jace Johnson. They lost some talent there on offense. They got one of the state's best, rising running backs in the area, and Alvin Celestine. They call him YJ down here. He's probably one of the fastest guys on the Bayou. Um, Terrebonne, I think is going to be a team that I'm looking forward to see this year. I know they lost a lot, but I think that they can still make that next step, to winning a playoff game. They're not going to win a state championship, you know, in my opinion. I hate to say never, never, but it's so hard in 5A with Destrehan's. They're gonna compete with those teams, but it's gonna be hard for them to win a state championship. But they can make a lot of noise this year, and that'd be great for Terrebonne. They can Coach Tyler Lewis, Coach Zylan March, those guys, they do a really good job with those kids. And I think, you can't count them out. And, I'm going to take it back. They're going to believe they can win a state championship, but, they got the weapons to do it. It's going to be a challenge, but I'm looking forward to see, those guys play at Terrebonne. I think they're going to be a really good team. And that's been one of our consistent programs the last 10 years down there. So, but keep your eye
Yeah.
on Terrebonne. I didn't want to end the chat without talking about Orion Mosley and Alvin Celestine and Quincy McCade, a really good receiver who just committed to Tuskegee. And they got a lot of really other good players on that team too. So I'm looking forward to see Terrebonne play this year.
Yeah, I like that Terrebonne team a lot, and that offensive line group is really good. You mentioned Orion; they've got the younger Bingham brother, who's a starting
he might,
offensive lineman, and
yeah, he
you
might be.
mentioned
I've heard some people say he might be. Well, Talon was pretty good, but that younger Bingham boy, he's right up there too. I mean, they're physical, man. They're really good. He's going to be a load to handle this year, definitely on the line.
uh, and you mentioned Alvin with Terrebonne, Jalen at Vanderbilt Catholic, and some of the other guys we're talking about. Jakias at St. James. Some
Okay.
of the small but absolutely electric playmakers that are around that area are going to be a lot of fun too to watch them cut up in space.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and Alvin Celestine, man, he is just so fun to watch. I know last year he was kind of banged up at times because he may be a small body, but he's so fast. He has one of the fastest times in the 100. He's definitely going to compete for track state championships the next couple of years, and he's already has a long list of offers with SEC schools. I think Arkansas is one of them. So I'm looking forward to see what he can do now that last couple of years he shared the load with Jace Johnson. They called him Boogie. He's now at Louisiana Christian. I think that's where he's playing college football now. But now that Jace is gone, they also got another really good running back in Quincy Adams too. That's another guy to watch out for. I watched him play in the spring game. He had a couple long touchdown runs. So Terrebonne has some really good young runners coming up, but definitely Alvin Celestine. I'm looking forward to seeing him make a name for himself and more people across the state really get to know who he is because he's going to be one of the best. By the time he's a senior, he's going to be one of the best, probably highly ranked recruits across the state. Definitely.
No doubt, he's rising up the ranks for his class. Chris, a 5-star reporter down there in the Bayou, Chris Singleton, who I appreciate you. I appreciate your time on a Friday afternoon, man, recording this thing.
Well, this is my life. Even though I'm not day-to-day reporting anymore, man, I still stay close to these schools, and I still gotta keep my memory refreshed on the new crop. Now I know a lot about the old guys now that's moved on to college, but a lot of new young players that I'm looking forward to seeing playing around across this area. So I think it's gonna be a great year on the Bayou, and I'm looking forward to not only watching them play, but also share their highlights and big moments across my social media. I'm looking forward to doing what I can to give them some exposure.
No doubt. Looking forward to seeing all of it, man. Again, he's Chris Singleton. He's over at Nickel State now, a longtime sports reporter in the Bayou region. And he mentioned he knows the history going back, and I mean, watching guys come through there for years, and still keeping up very well with this next crop of fantastic talent coming out of there. And for Louisiana versus all y'all, Jarrett Roser.
Good deal. Hey, the Bayou, man, we got some life down here. Keep that in mind. You're seeing a lot of them playing Saturday football now. So, Kyron Lacey, Kyle and Billy Yates, right there at Florida State. We got Jakai and we got Jalen Lucas. So Bayou can play, man. Definitely keep your eye on the Bayou. It's in our blood, and we can make some noise this year.